We are told the great fires of the 19th century were tragic accidents, clearing the way for progress from a world of wood. But the evidence screams a different story, a story of inversion. These were not accidents that destroyed wooden towns. They were operations that erased stone empires. The photographs do not lie. They show temperatures hot enough to melt stone and vitrify brick, a thermic signature that a simple wood fire cannot produce. If you have also felt this dissonance in the official story, this quiet hum of a lie told too often, leave your mark below. Let us know from where and at what time you are watching this transmission. We are told to look at these photographs as relics of a primitive past, a world of wood and dust waiting for the spark of progress. But we are not here to reminisce. We are here to conduct a forensic examination. Look with eyes unburdened by the official narrative. Hear Chicago or Boston or Seattle before the fire. Witness the profound cognitive dissonance. The streets are a sea of mud, unpaved, almost impassable. The people, dressed in simple, functional fabrics, stand beside crude wooden carts. They look small. They look temporary. And then, look at the buildings they inhabit. They are not buildings. A targeted, strategic immolation of the ancient city centers, the very places where the records, the lineage, and the cultural memory of the previous civilization were stored in stone and paper. This was not an epidemic of bad luck. It was a synchronized cleansing, a global campaign to sever the nodes of a planetary network. We are not looking at the histories of separate, bickering nations. We are looking at the crime scene of a war against a single, unified global civilization. A civilization whose architectural DNA was so consistent that the same buildings appear in 19th century photographs of America, Russia, Japan, and Australia. They were not built by the horse and buggy pioneers we see posing awkwardly in the mud in front of them. They were the inherited infrastructure of a fallen empire. The fires were the final, brutal act of a hostile takeover, the systematic deletion of the old world's operating system to install the new control matrix. And the most audacious part of this plan was how they celebrated the demolition. The connection between these great fires and the subsequent World's Fairs is not a coincidence. It is the causal link that exposes the entire conspiracy. It is the victor's parade held on the graves of the vanquished. Look again at Chicago. They are citadels, cyclopean structures of granite and brick, adorned with spires that pierce the sky, with domes that echo a forgotten geometry, with archways so vast they seem built for a race of giants. The shadow of a single doorway could swallow a family whole. Feel the cold texture of that sculpted stone through the photograph. Contrast it with the organic filth of the street below. These people do not look like the architects of this magnificence. They look like survivors. Inheritors of a technology they no longer comprehend, camping in the silent ruins of a far superior civilization. This is the first anomaly. The peasant paradox. A population seemingly incapable of conceiving these structures, let alone engineering and constructing them. Now look at the aftermath. The cover narrative tells us a simple fire, a tragic accident, swept through these wooden towns. But the evidence left behind does not scream accident. It whispers of a weapon. We are shown not just destruction, but a chillingly selective demolition. The flimsy wooden structures are, of course, gone. But observe the skeletons of the stone titans that remain. They are hollowed out, calcined from the inside, as if baked in a planetary-scale kiln. Look closely at the bricks. They are not merely blackened. They are often vitrified, melted, their structural integrity cooked into dust. The Great Fire of 1871 creates the ultimate blank slate. It wipes the board clean. 22 years later, in 1893, on that very same scorched earth, they erect the world's Columbian Exposition. The White City. The official narrative presents this as a testament to the indomitable spirit of American ingenuity. Look, they declared, how we rose from the ashes to build this magnificent utopia in just 2 decades. But the forensic reality tells a different story. The message was not, look what we can build. The message was, this is what we took from you. The World's Fairs were a form of mass psychological conditioning. They erected temporary dreamlike cities made of plaster and staff, cities that mimicked the grandeur of the very Tartarian civilization they had just destroyed, and presented them to an amnesiac, traumatized populace. It was a grand spectacle of managed disclosure. They showcased new controlled technologies like the alternating current electrical grid, framing it as a novel invention, while the infrastructure they had just burned was likely powered by a far more advanced atmospheric energy system. They introduced new economic and social paradigms. They created a carefully curated theme park of the past, present, and future, all designed to legitimize the new timeline and the new masters. The White City was a beautiful, hypnotic lie. And the iron, the steel beams that were the pride of the age, they are twisted like licorice, contorted into impossible shapes. A wood fire burns at around 700 degrees Celsius. Iron melts at over 500 degrees. What you are seeing is not the result of burning timber. It is the signature of an incendiary agent that burns with impossible, exotic heat. It is the visual fingerprint of a thermitic reaction, or something far more advanced. Pause the video here if you must. Examine this single image of a twisted steel girder against the sky. If you too see the thermodynamic impossibility of the official story, if you feel the cold certainty that a simple flame could not do this, then acknowledge it. Affirm your observation with a like, so this evidence can break through the algorithm of forgetting. But the sterilization of the scene goes deeper. As the cleanup crews begin their work, a second crime scene is revealed. Notice in the post-fire photographs how the demolition exposes foundations, basements, entire floors that were previously underground. The street level these people walked on was a lie. The true ground floor of these monolithic structures was buried, meters deep, in a previous cataclysm, a great mud flood. The fires were not just an act of demolition. It was a ghost of the real world that had been annihilated by fire, a final, fleeting glimpse of our stolen inheritance, presented to us as a fantasy before it too was torn down. They showed us heaven, then handed us a tenement block and called it progress. This pattern too is global. The 1889 fire in Seattle paves the way for its own era of reconstruction and participation in this new globalist spectacle. The Great Fire of Baltimore in 1904 is followed by a furious rebuilding effort that transforms the city, aligning it with the new century's agenda. Each fire is a reset button. Each fair is the installation of the new software. They burn the authentic and replace it with a disposable theatrical copy to manage our transition into a lower density reality. They are rubbing our noses in what we have lost, while conditioning us to be grateful for the cage they built in its place. The signature of this lost world, this global empire of stone and resonant energy, is not confined to grainy photographs in forgotten archives. It is all around us. It is written in the brick and stone of our own hometowns. The old post office that looks like a Roman temple. The county courthouse with a dome that rivals a European cathedral. They were an act of sanitation. A strategic, thermal scouring of the primary evidence. They burned the remaining Tartarian architecture to hide the fact that it was already partially buried. They needed to erase the memory of the water, and they used fire to do it. What we are witnessing in these photographs is not a series of tragedies. It is a coordinated, global campaign of architectural assassination. We are looking at the crime scene, moments after the perpetrators have fled, leaving behind a smoldering silence and a new, fabricated history ready to be built upon the ashes. We are the first generation to return to this scene not as mourners, but as investigators, and the stones themselves are beginning to speak. And so we pivot from the scorched earth and twisted steel, the physical grammar of the crime scene, to examine the most delicate, most brittle piece of evidence of all, the story. The official narrative, the bedtime story we are told to help us sleep in the ruins of a forgotten world. Every great deception requires a simple, digestible lie at its core, a fairy tale for the masses, and the tale of the great fires is a masterclass in this dark art. We are told that history is a sequence of unfortunate events, a chapter of accidents. The downtown library that seems impossibly grand for the small town it serves. These are the survivors. The architectural orphans left behind after the Great Cleansing. They stand in silent testimony, their true function forgotten, their context erased. They are dismissed as mere historical curiosities, examples of revivalist architecture. But they are not revivals, they are relics, the last remaining hardware of a system that was violently decommissioned. So we ask you to stop. The next time you walk through your city, look up. Look past the modern glass and steel, past the disposable commercial facades. Look for the anomalies. The red brick titans with their arched windows and impossible masonry. The stone buildings with foundations that sink deep below the modern street level. The structures that feel out of place, out of time, like palaces dropped into a parking lot. They are there. They are everywhere, from small American towns to sprawling European capitals. This is not a theory. It is an observable reality, hidden in plain sight. Have you seen these same displaced buildings, this same architectural signature, in your own city? Recognize them for what they are, markers of a crime scene. And tell us where you found them. Become a forensic investigator of your own environment. Because every one of these buildings is a loose thread that, when pulled, helps to unravel the entire fabric of the great lie. That on October 8, 1871, a perfect storm of drought and wind conspired, by sheer, breathtaking coincidence, to ignite two of the most devastating infernos in American history on the very same day. In Chicago, the story is almost offensively quaint. A cow, belonging to a Mrs. O'Leary, kicks over a lantern in a barn, and a wooden city goes up in flames. It's a story fit for a children's book, complete with a simple cause and a blameless animal. It is a narrative so perfectly folksy, so homespun, that to question it feels like an act of cynicism. Meanwhile, over 400 kilometers to the north, in Peshtigo, Wisconsin, a fire of such apocalyptic intensity that it created its own firenado incinerated over 1,200 people in a single night, the deadliest fire in the nation's history. The official explanation? The same. Dry conditions, high winds, a tragic but entirely separate coincidence. We are asked by academia, by the gatekeepers of the official timeline, to accept this. To look at two simultaneous, hyper-intense, and historically significant conflagrations separated by a vast distance, and conclude that it was simply bad luck. This is the point where the script begins to fray. This is the moment the cognitive dissonance becomes a screaming alarm. Are we, as thinking beings, truly expected to swallow this statistical absurdity? And so, the fires fell silent, the embers cooled, and the ash settled like a gray final snow. And what became of us, the survivors? What became of the generations born into the quiet aftermath? We became tenants. Ignorant tenants in a palace we did not build, and whose mechanisms we could no longer comprehend. We wander the halls of a dead empire, mistaking its intricate machinery for decoration. We are a cargo cult, living in the shadow of a forgotten science, performing rituals we do not understand. The anthropological term describes island tribes who, after seeing military aircraft deliver supplies, built effigies of planes and runways out of straw, hoping to summon the return of the cargo. They mimicked the form, having no access to the function. They performed the ritual, having no grasp of the technology. Look around you. Look at our world. Are we so different? We are a global cargo cult, and the cargo we long for is our own lost memory. The few grand structures of the old world that were permitted to survive the culling, the ones too iconic or too resilient to be completely erased, underwent a profound and tragic transformation. Consider the Chicago Water Tower, a limestone sentinel that stood defiant amidst the ruins of 1871. The cover narrative celebrates it as a symbol of resilience. A coincidence of this magnitude is not a coincidence. It is a signature. It is the echo of a coordinated, synchronized event. The story of Mrs. O'Leary's cow is not history. It is a cover narrative, a piece of folklore engineered to be so simple and memorable that it overwrites the complex and terrifying truth. It is a lullaby designed to stop us from asking the real questions. And what happens after the fire, after the official story is dutifully printed in the newspapers? An even more fantastical tale begins, the myth of the heroic founder. From the smoking embers of these supposedly primitive wooden towns, a new class of men emerges, as if from nowhere. The visionary architects, the master city planners, men like Daniel Burnham and John Root. They are presented to us as titans of industry and art, geniuses who single-handedly raised majestic cities of stone and steel from the ashes in a miraculous handful of years. The narrative is one of triumphant rebirth, of the modern world rising phoenix-like from the primitive past. But we, as forensic investigators of this narrative, must pause. We must ask the questions that the storytellers hope we will ignore. Where did these men come from? Where are the records of the vast architectural universities that trained this sudden, unprecedented generation of master builders? But what was its original purpose? Was it merely a container for water, Or was it something more? Was it, as the structural echoes suggest, a functional piece of a vast urban machine? An atmospheric energy extractor, perhaps, a harmonic resonator tuning the city to a specific frequency? We will never know. Because in the reset, its function was annihilated, and it was reborn as a symbol, a totem. The survivors and their children looked upon this technological marvel not with understanding, but with a primitive awe. They could not operate it, they could not replicate it, so they revered it. Function became form, machine became monument, knowledge became superstition. This is the core principle of our cargo cult civilization. We preserve the husks of a superior technology as heritage sites, as tourist attractions, their true power neutered, their purpose forgotten, reduced to mere aesthetics for a population that has been engineered to forget what they are truly looking at. We take photographs of silenced engines and call it culture. The most cynical act of this psychological inversion, however, was the ritualization of the weapon itself. From the ashes of the great fires, a new hero was born, the firefighter. An entire civic religion was constructed around them. Opulent, magnificent fire stations were built, often in the very same grand architectural style that the fires had been designed to eradicate. Where were their grand portfolios before the fires? The historical record is strangely silent. They seem to appear curias nihilo, fully formed, precisely when a city needed to be rebuilt. The truth, when viewed through a forensic lens, is far less heroic and far more sinister. These were not creators. They were liquidators. They were not architects of a new world, but demolition managers for the old one. Their task was not to build from scratch, a logistical paradox we will dissect later, but to manage the NUSP downgrading of the existing infrastructure. They were the administrators of the Great Reset. They took the superstructures of the previous age, the remnants of the Astric Antiquitech asterisks that had been sterilized by the fire, and supervised their containment. They built a new, inferior, and more controllable grid over the bones of the old one. The grand boulevards were not their invention. They were simply paved over remnants. The sewer systems they are credited with were often just cleaned out and repurposed sections of a far older, more sophisticated network. Their genius was not in creation, but in concealment. They were masters of the cover-up, burying the evidence of the former world under a new layer of acceptable, controllable, human-scale construction. They didn't build our modern cities. They built the prisons that were placed upon the foundations of a giant's kingdom. This is a level of irony so profound it borders on the demonic. The state, the new parasitic entity, created a priesthood dedicated to publicly fighting the very element it had secretly weaponized to seize control. These grand firehouses are not monuments to safety. They are monuments to a successful psyop. They are a constant, subconscious reminder of who controls the flame. By celebrating the firefighter, we are taught to fear the fire, to see it as a chaotic, natural enemy that only the state can protect us from. We are conditioned to forget that in the hands of our predecessors, fire was a tool of industry and creation, and that in the hands of our controllers, it was a tool of demolition and conquest. We now worship the tamers of the beast that was unleashed upon us, a perfect loop of control. This mimicry extends to every facet of our inherited world. The spires and domes that still punctuate our skylines, are they just architectural flair? Or are they the silent deactivated terminals of an energy grid we can no longer access? Are the obelisks in our city centers mere memorials? Or are they acupuncture needles in the Earth's ley lines, their resonant purpose now a complete mystery to the ants crawling at their base? So let us ask ourselves, you and I, does this official story feel complete? Does the tale of a clumsy cow and a sudden, spontaneous generation of architectural geniuses satisfy your intellect? Or do you feel a deep, unsettling resonance with the alternative? That what we are looking at is not a series of accidents, but a campaign, a carefully scripted demolition followed by a managed, theatrical reconstruction. The fragility of this official narrative is its greatest weakness. It was never designed to withstand scrutiny. It was designed for passive acceptance. It is a story for a traumatized, amnesiac population, eager to believe in simple tales of tragedy and triumph. But we are not that population anymore. We are waking up inside the crime scene, and the story they gave us simply doesn't match the evidence on the ground. The fairy tale is over. The fairy tale is a fragile thing. It offers comfort, a simple cause for a complex effect, a villain as mundane as a cow kicking a lantern. But it shatters against the cold, hard anvil of physics. The narrative they gave us, the one of tragedy and heroic rebirth, is not just a story. It is a declaration of war on the laws of thermodynamics and logistics. And in this war, the numbers are our only reliable weapon. We have inherited a network of cathedrals, whose acoustic properties and sacred geometry hint at a function far beyond simple worship. We now use them for sermons and concerts, like a child using a complex astrolabe as a dinner plate. We see the antennas of the old world, and, not knowing their purpose, we place crosses on top of them, converting a scientific instrument into a religious icon. We look upon the colossal, impossibly ornate municipal buildings and power stations of the late 19th century, the so-called Beaux-Arts or Renaissance Revival structures, and we are told they were built by men with horse-drawn carts and rudimentary tools. This cognitive dissonance is the hum of our existence. We are expected to believe our recent ancestors, living in seas of mud, suddenly decided to build palaces for pumping water and generating electricity, with a level of artistry and permanence that we can't or won't replicate today. It is a lie so bold it paralyzes the logical mind. The truth is far simpler and far more tragic. We didn't build them. We found them. We cleaned them out. We repurposed them. And then, we invented a story about heroic founders to explain their existence. We are squatters, telling heroic tales about our own imagined genius. They ask us to believe that cities made primarily of wood and kindling created their own funeral pyres. They present us with the image of a primitive, flammable world, waiting for a spark. Let us, for a moment, accept their premise. Let us perform the audit. A standard wood fire, under ideal conditions, burns at approximately 600 to 800 degrees Celsius. This is a known, quantifiable fact. It is the temperature of a campfire, a hearth, a burning barn. It is hot enough to consume timber, to warp metal, to claim lives. It is not, however, hot enough to melt steel. The melting point of iron, the very skeleton of the modern world they claim was born from these ashes, is 1,538 degrees Celsius, more than double the heat of a raging wood fire. The point at which sand vitrifies, turning brick and mortar into a glassy, molten slag, is over 1,700 degrees Celsius. These are not opinions. They are fundamental constants of the material universe. Now look at the photographs. Look at the evidence from the scene of the crime. We are shown, again and again, the aftermath of Chicago, of Boston, of Seattle. We are told this is the result of burning wood. This is the state of our species. We are orphans living in our parents' home, a home filled with devices we now treat as sacred objects. We have forgotten the operating manual. The great silence that followed the fires was not just an absence of noise. It was an absence of knowledge. The blueprints were burned. The engineers were eliminated. The memory was erased. What remains is the hardware and our pathetic, ritualistic attempts to interface with it. We are left with a deep, gnawing sense of loss we cannot name. A feeling that we are living in a lesser world, a shadow of what once was. It is the genetic echo of a memory, the ghost of a lost capability. It is the quiet sadness of the cargo cult, waiting for the return of the gods, never realizing the gods were us. If this vision of an amnesiac humanity, of a species living in the afterglow of its own forgotten greatness, resonates with you, if you feel that same dissonance in your own soul, then verify that you are subscribed. We need awakened minds here, because we are piecing together the manual that was stolen from us. We are attempting to remember what it felt like to be the builders, not just the tenants. But what we see defies that narrative completely. We see steel I-beams, the pride of 19th century engineering, twisted into grotesque spaghetti-like contortions. This is not the gentle sagging of metal softened by a wood fire. This is the signature of a force that pushed structural steel past its melting point, treating it like taffy. We see entire city blocks where the brickwork has not merely collapsed, but has been fused together into a single, vitrified mass. We see rivers of melted glass and stone that flowed through the streets before solidifying, evidence of a heat so intense it liquefied the very earth upon which the city was built. This is not the work of a wood fire. This is the thermal signature of an industrial furnace, of a thermite reaction burning at 2,500 degrees, or of a technology we are not supposed to understand. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. They show us a photograph of a melted, slagged city and tell us a cow did it. They present evidence of blast furnace temperatures and blame it on dry weather. It is a cover narrative so brazen, so contemptuous of our intelligence, that its acceptance requires a complete suspension of disbelief. The city of wood is a lie. The photographs prove it. The fires were never the beginning of the story. They were Act 2 of a 3-part crime, a brutal, planetary-scale trilogy of erasure. Act 1 was the burial, the great mud flood that swallowed the foundations of a global empire and left us as bewildered survivors in a world too grand for our supposed history. But burial is not enough. A body can be exhumed. Evidence can be unearthed. For the reset to be absolute, the scene of the crime had to be sterilized. The memory itself had to be incinerated. Act 2 was the fire, not a random series of tragedies, but a coordinated technological purge. This was not arson. It was a tactical protocol. The impossible heat that melted brick and vitrified stone, the eyewitness accounts of flames spreading against the wind, these are not the signatures of a wooden city burning. They are the hallmarks of a weapon deployed with surgical precision. We are left to speculate on its nature. An atmospheric energy discharge, a chemical agent far beyond our public science, but its function is undeniable. It was a cauterizing agent for history, a planetary-scale archive burning. The true targets were not the people, not directly. They were the silent witnesses, the halls of record, the libraries. The laws of physics scream it. The fires were not an accident that cleared away a primitive settlement. They were the deployment of an advanced incendiary weapon to neutralize a civilization of stone and iron. The destruction itself is only the first impossibility. The second, and perhaps the greater logistical paradox, is the story of the miraculous reconstruction. Let us again perform the audit. They tell us that Chicago, a city of 300,000 people whose central business district was completely annihilated, was rebuilt, bigger and grander, in just a few years. Let us move beyond the realm of sentiment and into the cold calculus of supply chain management. To rebuild Chicago required materials. Let's start with bricks. An estimated 750 million bricks were needed for the reconstruction. Where did they come from? The official story suggests a boom in local brickyards. But a brickyard is not a magical thing. It requires massive clay pits, armies of laborers, mountains of coal or wood for the kilns, and a transportation network to move millions of tons of finished product. All of this industrial capacity would have had to exist before the fire, ready to spring into action. There is no record of such a colossal industrial base. It is a ghost, a statistical anomaly. The patent offices, the municipal archives. Within those magnificent stone structures, the ones that burned from the inside out, lay the proof. The maps of the old world, the census data of the previous population, the land deeds, the scientific blueprints of the inherited technology we now call mysterious. The fire was an instrument of memory engineering. You cannot introduce a new, false narrative while the old, true one is still on the shelves. You must burn the books. You must burn the maps. You must reduce the entire database of a civilization to ash and slag, creating a great silence where history used to be. And in that silence, any story can be told. The story of heroic pioneers building from nothing. The story of primitive wooden towns and tragic accidental fires. A cover story. But what of the living records? The children? The mechanism was as brilliant as it was monstrous. From the ashes of these incinerated cities came the orphan trains. We are told this was a story of charity, of saving the lost and homeless children of the blaze. This is a cognitive dissonance of the highest order. It was not a rescue. It was a harvest, a systematic collection of the traumatized and the amnesiac, children whose parents and past had been vaporized by the weapon. They ask us to believe that an entire materials industry, capable of rebuilding one of the world's great cities, materialized out of thin air in a region that had just been economically devastated. Then there is the steel, the tens of thousands of tons of iron and steel beams. Where were the foundries, the iron mines, the coking coal operations? The rail lines to transport these millions of tons of raw and finished materials into a city whose entire infrastructure, including its rail yards, had just been turned to slag? Every ton of steel requires approximately 2 tons of iron ore and 1 ton of coal. The logistical train for this operation would have been one of the largest industrial undertakings in human history. Yet, in the historical record, it is treated as a footnote. A miracle. Miracles, however, do not exist in logistics. There are only inputs and outputs. The inputs required to rebuild Chicago on that timeline, from scratch, are not present in the historical or archaeological record. The math does not work. And what of the men? The tens of thousands of skilled laborers, masons, carpenters, engineers, architects, where did they come from? How were they housed in a city of ruins? How were they fed, watered, and paid? The logistics of sustaining a workforce of this size would rival a major military campaign. They were loaded onto trains and scattered across the new territories, their names changed, their memories suppressed, their minds a blank slate upon which the new history, the new religion of progress from tragedy, could be inscribed. A generation was created from scratch, with no connection to the world before the fire. They were the engineered ancestors of our own ignorance. The physical demolition, the informational purge, and the generational reprogramming. This was the complete trifecta, a perfect reset. They didn't just destroy the cities. They destroyed the memory of who had built them, how they worked, and why they were there. They created a species of amnesiacs, living in the ruins of our own forgotten kingdom, terrified of the very element they used to make us orphans. The silence is their greatest weapon. Sharing this information is our only defense. Send this to someone who needs to wake up. And so, the final act of the Great Erasure was complete. The deluge buried the world. The fire sterilized the evidence. And the orphan trains reprogrammed the survivors. What was left was not a civilization reborn, but a species reset. A population severed from its own memory, left to wander the ruins of its own forgotten magnificence. We are the children of this amnesia. Yet again, the official history is largely silent. They simply appeared. This is the great vacuum at the heart of the narrative, the negative evidence. We see the rebuilt city, but we do not see the quarries from which the stone was cut. We do not see the immense brickyards. We do not see the sprawling foundries. We do not see the records of the colossal financial transactions needed to fund it all. We are presented with a finished product without any evidence of the means of production. It is a logical fallacy of the highest order. There is only one explanation that resolves this logistical paradox. The materials were already there. The foundations were already there. The core infrastructure was already in place. The reconstruction was not a creation from nothing. It was a massive salvage and refurbishment operation. They were not building a new city. They were excavating and repurposing an old one. They were clearing the rubble from the upper levels of a far older, far more magnificent metropolis that had been damaged and buried by a previous cataclysm, the mud flood. The fires were the final, brutal act of sterilization, a way to flash-bake the evidence, destroy the delicate interiors, and create a plausible cover narrative for the rebuilding effort that was to follow. We inhabit a world of plasterboard and kindling, taught from birth to fear the very element that made us orphans. We build our disposable homes in the shadows of scorched, fireproof titans, the few structures that survived the purge, and we call them heritage. A more honest term would be evidence. We are a cargo cult in our own homeland, performing rituals of progress while living in a demonstrably weaker, more fragile reality. This is the ultimate success of the control matrix, to convince the prisoner not only that his cell is a palace, but that he built it himself. The Great Fires did not just burn down cities. They burned away our identity. They incinerated the public record, yes, but their true target was the human spirit. They were a weapon of psychological warfare, designed to instill a permanent, inherited trauma. A deep-seated fear that our world is inherently unstable and can be swept away by a random spark. This engineered vulnerability makes us compliant. It makes us look to the very architects of our destruction for salvation. The official narrative, the story of the tragic accident and the heroic reconstruction, is the lullaby they sing to us in our burning cradle. It is the cover story for the greatest crime ever committed, the theft of our past, our potential, and our cosmic dignity. They simply cleared away the fire-damaged upper floors and built a lesser world upon the titanic foundations of the old. This is the truth, hidden in the accounting books of history. The numbers do not lie. The impossible heat of the destruction and the impossible logistics of the reconstruction are two halves of the same confession. They are the bookends of a single, coordinated event, an act of demolition, followed by an act of renovation on a planetary scale. We are asked to believe in a world that violates the laws of physics and economics, a world of spontaneous industrial booms and magical workforces, a world where wood burns hotter than a furnace, and cities rise from ashes without materials or men. This is not history, it is a spell, a carefully constructed illusion designed to hide the greatest crime ever committed, the theft of our past, our inheritance, and our identity. The numbers are unforgiving. They do not bend to narrative. If a plausible model exists that can reconcile this thermodynamic and logistical chasm within the official account, we are waiting to see it. The silence, so far, has been absolute. The thermodynamic and logistical impossibilities of the official narrative leave us standing in the ashes of a lie. The heat signatures do not match the fuel source. This investigation, therefore, is not merely about architecture. It is not a lament for lost stone and mortar. It is an act of reclamation. It is about remembering who we were before the flames. We were not primitive settlers huddling in wooden shacks, astonished by our own ability to lay bricks. We were the inheritors, and perhaps the builders, of a global, resonant technology that they had to use cataclysmic force to dismantle. Every memorial to a great fire is not a tombstone for a tragedy, but a marker for a crime scene. To accept their story is to remain a child, content with fairy tales. To question it is the first step toward reclaiming our adulthood as a species. It is to declare that we are not the fearful, fragile creatures they have told us we are. We are the descendants of a civilization so advanced its destruction had to be passed off as an act of God. The excavation of this truth is the most important work of our time. It is a forensic archaeology of the soul. We are not simply uncovering buildings, we are recovering our own silenced capabilities, our own suppressed identity. The choice is stark, to live out our lives in the comfortable prison of their narrative, or to face the terrible, magnificent truth of our inheritance. The timeline for reconstruction defies the laws of industrial production. We are faced with a dissonant reality, a crime scene where the murder weapon is impossible, and the victim's body was rebuilt before it was even cold. This cognitive dissonance is not a flaw in our logic, it is a feature of the cover narrative. It is the first breadcrumb leading us out of the labyrinth. But to follow the trail, we must lift our gaze from the scorched earth of a single city and look to the horizon. We must ask the most dangerous question of all. If this happened in Chicago, where else did it happen? The answer is a cascade of geographic vertigo, a dizzying realization that shatters the illusion of isolated tragedies. This was not a uniquely American phenomenon. This was a global protocol. The pattern repeats with a chilling, mathematical precision, an echo in stone and ash that reverberates across continents and oceans. In 1870, 1 year before Chicago, the Para district of Istanbul, the cosmopolitan heart of the Ottoman capital, is consumed by a fire of impossible speed and intensity. The old European quarter, filled with magnificent stone embassies and palatial residences, the very architecture we are told is fireproof, is wiped from the map. And what replaces it? The investigation does not stop here. It deepens. If you feel compelled to continue unearthing the truth with us, you know the protocol. Join the excavation. Activate the signal. Welcome to the resistance. A modern, grid-based layout, more easily controlled, more easily monitored. The same script. The same outcome. We leap across the map to Turku, Finland, 1827. The Great Fire of Turku, one of the largest in the history of the Nordic countries, annihilates 3/4 of a city renowned for its ancient stone cathedral and medieval structures. The official story blames a careless maid, a single moment of human error to explain the obliteration of a national capital. In the aftermath, a new city plan is imposed, a rigid, fire-resistant grid. The old world is erased, its organic, perhaps resonant, layout replaced by the cold geometry of the new order. The pattern holds. Again, we jump. Hamburg, 1842. A so-called accidental fire rages for 3 days, destroying the medieval core of the great port city. A third of the city, the oldest part, filled with irreplaceable architecture, simply vanishes. And what rises from the ashes? A rebuilt city, praised for its modernity, its wider streets, its new infrastructure. They tell us it was progress born from tragedy. We are beginning to see it was a demolition followed by an occupation. From the Great Fire of London centuries before, to the fires of Moscow, Copenhagen, and countless other administrative and cultural hubs of the Old World, the signature is identical.